Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're watching this. This is Tailgate Trash Talk NFL Draft Wrap-Up Edition. I'm riding solo for a few minutes here. We should have Stove shortly, so you won't have to deal with just hearing my voice all night. But let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about mine here, and as Stove joins us, we'll let him wrap up his thoughts on the draft. But we had a lot of action in the draft, and we don't normally see that, but I think that's a testament to what this draft offered. And we've talked a lot about this not being a quarterback heavy class, this being a draft that you can build things, those peripheral positions, right? It's defensive line was very heavy. Offensive line was pretty deep. Wide receiver, very deep. And it was also very top heavy with wide receiver as well. So you saw a lot of jostling for position, teams coming up, teams moving around, to get those premier wide receivers. And then you saw a team like the Green Bay Packers that would have had to move up pretty far, didn't pull the trigger like you saw Detroit. They pulled the trigger, moved up to 12 to get Jamison Williams. The Packers decided to hold off on that. And as we've seen in the past, all the pundits and, including myself, wonder, why it is that they seem to not really go and try to get that elite level talent to put around Aaron Rodgers. He's complained in the past about, them not drafting offensive talent. We saw it again, right? And then they go get a guy in Christian Watson later in the draft that I think is going to be a good pro, but he's not going to be, one of those guys that's going to light the world on fire. And he, he wasn't in the top 12, top 15 for a reason. But as is kind of tradition with the draft, we want to talk some winners, some losers, talk about maybe somebody who went too early, somebody who might have gone too late, or at least flew under the radar. And then at the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about NIL because that's been really hot in the news lately. And we've talked about it a couple of times, but they're putting together a task force. So Stove and I are going to talk a little bit about said task force here at the end of the show. Let's start with our draft winners, though. Okay. These are teams that Stove and I have picked, and, we think they did really well in the draft, right? Not, it's pretty obvious, right? But teams that we think did really well, filling needs maybe, or getting some of the best talent, right? So let's talk draft winners. All right, so I'll leave these open for Stove. We'll get back to his when he gets on. But I picked the Lions, and I picked Howie Roseman, right? And for several years, Howie Roseman has taken a lot of flack for missing on wide receivers. They've taken some shots with some guys, Jalen Reagor, et cetera, in the draft that have flopped, right, for lack of a better term. And it is a little bit of quarterback play here and there, but these wide receivers, for whatever reason, they draft them. And what makes it worse for Eagles fans is that whenever Howie Roseman was drafting one of these guys, the guy who went a pick or two picks in front, or maybe even a pick or two picks behind, ended up being somebody like Justin Jefferson, ended up being somebody like DK Metcalf, right? And the list does go on. It's not just those two. It's several picks that have flopped for the Eagles and guys that are picked close to somebody that the Eagles picked, or maybe they passed on him. Turns out to be a stud, right? So looking at this draft, you had to think that the Eagles were going to follow up the Devontae Smith pick from last year and continue to put wide receiver talent on the field, because if they're sold on Jalen Hurts, then they've got to give him weapons, right? He's not a guy that's going to sit back in the pocket, pick a defense apart, audible at the line of scrimmage, get the team in the right formation, get the team in the right matchup, right? Take advantage of, do I have a linebacker on a tight end? Do I have a linebacker on a running back that just motioned out of the backfield, right? Do I have that mismatch? How do I take advantage of that? Hey, Dad, thanks for joining. But the Eagles have to start stockpiling talent, right? And you had to figure they were going to go with one of those top handful of guys, right? Leading up to the draft, I think that was the conversation. That was my expectation, that they were going to add a wide receiver to the mix after the Devontae Smith pick last year. I really liked that pick. I hated that it was the Eagles that got him, but because I really liked him coming out of college. But I liked the pick that they made, as impartial as I can be, right? I liked the pick that they made, but I also had to, you had to think they were going to add some. They lost Zach Ertz last year. that trade to Arizona. They were going to add some pass catchers. And they did that in the first round, but not with a pick. They didn't pick somebody, right? They ended up making a trade for one of the premier wide receivers in the league, a guy that was looking to get paid. Well, the Eagles have some cap space. They've got a quarterback that's on a rookie contract, and we see what teams can do when they've got guys on rookie contracts. Think about the Seahawks of Russell Wilson, how they were able to pay everybody on that defense and put Marshawn Lynch and some of the other playmakers around him and put a good offensive line in front of him, run the ball really well, make it easy on the quarterback, right? They end up winning a Super Bowl out of it. So these teams see this, right? Early in a quarterback's career, you've got an opportunity to wait for him to grow, but put talent around him so that makes the team better, right? So Howie Roseman picking up A.J. Brown via trade, big move there. The other one that I thought was a really big win for them was Nakobe Dean. He slipped really far. I was bitching for the first 3 rounds. Why isn't Washington taking him? Why isn't Washington taking him? Turns out some teams believe he needs shoulder surgery. I think the Eagles got to a point that they have a need at linebacker, and he had slipped far enough that they said, okay, enough's enough. We're going to take him. I was hoping he would go elsewhere, but, I have to tip my cap. The Eagles ended up with a nice pick there, kind of stealing a guy that I think could be a sideline-to-sideline linebacker, assuming that shoulder doesn't become a bigger issue. Maybe some of these teams, their medical staffs, they're onto something and it is a bigger issue than, I may be giving it credit for. But I thought the Eagles did really well. I thought Howie Roseman won because now think about all the Philly fans the day after the first round of the draft that had to be screaming from the rooftops, hey, we got A.J. Brown. We got a real wide receiver here. If Jalen Hurts is going to succeed, now is the time to succeed, right? He's got Devontae Smith. He's got A.J. Brown. He's got some decent running backs in the backfield. They can run the ball a little bit. They've got a good offensive line. I thought they retooled a bit on that offensive line as well. So Howie Roseman, hats off to you. Still hate the Eagles, but big win there, buddy, on draft day. And then the Lions, right? I was thoroughly impressed with what they did coming up to get Jameson Williams because that's a team that needs to put some playmakers on the field, right? They have all these memories of Calvin Johnson and what he was able to do. Well, they've got a guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown who's okay, right? He finished the season very strong last year. If he can keep that going at all, then they've got something there with him. Put another weapon with him, right? And the Lions had the draft capital to make a move here. I know Stove had them picking Malik Willis. I talked about them possibly getting Willis later. As Willis slipped, I kept looking at that Lions pick every single time, and it wasn't to be. But coming up to get Jameson Williams, he's a difference maker, right? And we talk about Tyreek Hill a lot. Tyreek Hill changes defenses. He changes game plans. He's an angle beater. He beats good angles. He beats bad angles. He beats guys who have elite speed on the defense. He's different, right? We've had some guys be compared to Tyreek Hill, right? With that elite speed. John Ross comes to mind when you're talking about a guy who broke the combine 40 record and how he was going to be able to threaten defenses deep. Think back previous to guys like Deshaun Jackson who could kind of take the top off of defenses. So when you have a guy with that level of speed, and it's different speed, it's get on you quick speed, it's disappear on you speed. Guys like Jameson Williams do change defenses, right? And assuming he's healthy, and all reports indicate that he's ahead in his rehab, these ACLs can be really weird. In terms of the injuries, he was kind of making a cut on a turf field, and his knee just gave out on him. He may never have problems again, right? But the indications that he's ahead in rehab must have the Lions feeling really good. And I think other teams were feeling that as well, right? With Jameson Williams, that he's a guy who, assuming the rehab goes well, he finishes it. If he's ready by the beginning of the season, that's going to be unreal. Having gotten hurt in January, being ready for a football game in August, September, will be awesome. That'll be Adrian Peterson sort of speed in terms of ACL recovery. So he's a guy that makes a difference for them. But I really was I was happy for Detroit, and I was happy for Aiden Hutchinson that he slipped to them, that the Jaguars went with Travon Walker. Walker may turn into a stud. they love athletes. Trent Baalke, right? He's a guy who drafted a bunch of guys who were athletes in San Francisco that weren't necessarily prolific college production guys, but just were elite athletes. And it looks like he's going to keep that pattern going there in Jacksonville. Walker was a guy that went to the combine and just popped, right? As soon as everybody saw what he was doing athletically in the 40, in the shuttle drills, in the defensive line drills, teams started to get real enamored with it. And I think defensive coordinators started to say, I might be able to do a little something with this guy. And he started to creep up draft boards. And then suddenly, about a week out from the draft, we started to hear rumors, right? Oh, Trent Baalke's an athlete guy. He's a guy that they expect him to like Travon Walker, that he's going to go after him, and that's going to be the pick. And it caught me a little off guard in terms of, him going first overall. But if I'm Detroit and I'm sitting at number 2, I'm kind of sitting in the catbird seat, right? If I don't get Aiden Hutchinson, there was a lot of talk about how much Kayvon Thibodeau hit off with management there in the front office there and the coaching staff there, right? They really were in on a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. So if Hutchinson goes 1 to the Jaguars, I think the Lions have a guy that they like in Thibodeau that they probably were going to draft at number 2. I think that they were pretty set that they were going to go defense at number 2. And I do believe that had Hutchinson gone 1, Thibodeau would have gone 2. But because the Jaguars went with Walker, the Lions get the homegrown from the Detroit area, from Michigan. They get Aiden Hutchinson here, who had a great career at Michigan, very productive especially in his last season there. And for all intents and purposes, for the longest time, people were talking about Aiden Hutchinson as if he was going to go number 1, and it was just a foregone conclusion, right? We had the discussion of Kayvon Thibodeau versus Aiden Hutchinson for a while, and then Thibodeau, there were questions about the work ethic, questions about his motor, questions about his dedication to football, questions about his, his love for the game, his passion for the game. He's a guy that's big into crypto, big into NFTs. So I think he started to slip on several teams' draft boards, whereas Hutchinson remained up there, but then here's this Travon Walker guy that sneaks in, and Jacksonville has a GM that takes a lot of chances on these athletes. And, I have to think Detroit felt really good about that Hutchinson pick. And then you look down the list and, Detroit had, a big draft in terms of building depth. That's a team that has a lot of holes. That's a team that needs to build a lot of stock across their entire roster there to get back to having a chance to compete, right? They still don't have a quarterback on the roster. I don't think they do. Maybe they've got a guy they can develop that they drafted this year, possibly. But I think that's a team that understands this may not be the year we're going to get a quarterback, but if we're going to draft a quarterback early in a draft here in the next year, 2 years, then I think they understand that they really need to put all of the pieces around him so that he can be successful. All right. So I want to talk, since we were talking winners here, I want to talk a little bit about draft grades, right? We had some strong draft grades, some weak draft grades. I want to talk about the 2 top and the 2 bottom here. We'll start with the 2 top because we just talked winners here, but Mel Kiper Jr. rated the Ravens and the Lions as his only 2 A grades. All right. Ravens went Kyle Hamilton first, but then they started to build the lines on both sides, right? They got Tyler Linderbaum out of Iowa. They got an edge rusher in David Ojabo, Travis Jones, an interior defensive lineman out of UConn, another offensive lineman. And then they started to build a little bit of those skill positions, cornerback, tight end. They got some depth. And, John Harbaugh being the special teams guy, they draft a punter here from LSU. So, or from Penn State, sorry. I agree with Mel Kiper. I thought the Ravens had an incredible draft, right? I agree that they should have gotten a pretty high grade. I probably would have given them an A as well. I like the Hamilton pick. He's a playmaker. We're used to Baltimore having playmakers at safety, right? Ed Reed et al. Throughout their time there in Baltimore, it's been safety predominantly, linebacker, of course, with Ray Lewis and Suggs and all the other guys that they Bullware and all those guys they can put on the field. But I think a guy like Kyle Hamilton in the back end of that defense is going to help them make some plays. I love the Linderbaum pick. I think he's probably the most polished offensive lineman in this draft. I know the offensive tackles are always kind of the premier position. They get all the pub, they get all the conversation leading up to the draft. But a guy like Linderbaum, I think he's just the real deal. And I think that there's a possibility that he could be the best offensive lineman out of this draft, and he could be the linchpin for that offense for 10, 12, 15 years. And then you look at what they did building the defensive line, building the defensive secondary. That's a defense that struggled, especially when they had a couple of injuries last year that really sapped their depth. They seem to not be able to stop anybody. Marcus Peters is a big hit, of course, because he's a guy that can cover one-on-one and make plays, and he's a guy that, takes picks to the house, takes a lot of chances. So I think they needed to build that defensive secondary. It starts with Hamilton, but they put some depth on the outside as well at cornerback. So, I like what they did there. The Jets is the other team that Mel Kiper listed as an A grade, and as you can see, Stove ranked them as one of his winners, right? And I think he had the Ravens as well. So he kind of agrees with what Mel Kiper's saying here with the Jets and the Ravens. So Jets got Sauce Gardner. I think he's the best cover guy in this draft. I can't believe we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but I can't believe Derek Stingley went as high as he did. Garrett Wilson, love that pick, right? Mostly for the position, but also because of what he brings. I think they've got Elijah Moore there that they got him a little later in the draft. He was either a second or a third round pick. I forget which one it was, but he's a guy that came on last year. Him and Zach Wilson didn't have a lot of chemistry early in the year, but late in the year after Zach Wilson had that little bit of time he missed with injury, he came back, and Elijah Moore picked it up during that time. And then when Wilson came back, it seemed like they kept it going. So I like that. I like adding another wide receiver. I like adding a guy like a Garrett Wilson who can run every route in the tree. Big time speed, a guy that can kind of get on top of you, get down the field. And then trading back up into the first round and getting a guy that slipped, right? This guy was talked about possibly in the top 10, top 12, no later than like 15. And they come back up in the 20s and get Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State, a guy that can really get after you off the edge on the defensive side of the ball. And they follow that up with two picks that I think are going to be big time picks for them in terms of adding and contributing and making Zach Wilson comfortable. Breece Hall out of Iowa State, the best running back in this draft, the most complete running back in this draft, goes to the Jets in the second round. Jeremy Ruckert, tight end out of Ohio State, a guy that can block off the edge, but also he can run some routes and he can catch the ball. He's not going to be a Tony Gonzalez. He's not going to be a Rob Gronkowski. He's not going to be, Travis Kelce in terms of making plays, in the passing game. But he's a guy that can get you 6, 7, 8 dirty yards, move the chains, be a safety valve, safety net for Zach Wilson. But he's a guy that's going to help with blocking, right? Sealing the edge for the run game. You just added Breece Hall. You had Michael Carter last year that you drafted. I think they're going to have a good 1-2 punch there with guys that can do it all, right? Michael Carter's a guy that can take the ball from the quarterback, but also can catch the ball out of the backfield. And that's what you get with Breece Hall as well. So good 1-2 punch there. Jeremy Ruckert's a guy that I think is going to give them some blocking on the edge, but also be able to catch the ball. Yeah, we do plenty of drinking around here, buddy. So let's move on to losers, right? Let's talk about draft losers here. Some teams that probably struggled more than they want to admit.
Audio Jungle.
All right, so for losers, wrong one. Sorry, technical difficulties. Getting ahead, and we had a theme here. NFC East. Stove and I both had the Cowboys. I had Washington as another loser here. I just look at what happened in this draft, and all year last year, the talk about why the defense was struggling was because middle linebacker, right? And we draft Jamin Davis last year in the first round, took a shot on a guy too early. He'd have been in the way too early that we're going to talk about later. Too early. never really came around, never really started producing, and almost didn't really get on the field late in the season. A guy like Cole Holcomb took over and played well at the end of the season, but I don't know if that's the guy that they want starting for them regularly. So, I just I look at it like, what are we doing if we're not gonna address Nakobe Dean's on the board? And when we were on the clock in the first round, there were a couple of guys on the board that could have filled that position, and we passed on them. Take a wide receiver, you trade out of a spot with Chris Olave, you could have gotten him. You end up with Jahan Dotson, who I'm not sold on. I don't like him. I don't think he's going to be a good pro. I hope I'm wrong about that. But then we draft Sam Howell late in the draft. We draft tight ends, and we get a safety that's all of his highlights are on special teams. He's also ran even in his own small conference, right? Played in the Big South or the Atlantic Sun. I can't remember what conference Louisiana's in, but he's like, all of his highlights are for special teams. We need safety help. What are we doing drafting a guy like that after we've drafted tight ends and in a quarterback we didn't need? And it's a nightmare to be a Washington fan sometimes, because we have no plan. We're just drafting Alabama guys, and I just don't get it. There's too much here. Brian Robinson, I think, is going to be a fine pro, but just like, what are we doing? We already have Antonio Gibson, who was one of the best backs in the league last year and can do all of the things that Brian Robinson does. Are we moving on from Gibson? Maybe. Are we going to put them both in the backfield at the same time? Maybe. But I don't trust Scott Turner. So why are we spending draft capital that high on running back? I just don't get it, and especially a duplicative running back. Like, he's the same guy that Antonio Gibson is. It's crazy. Yeah, Justin, I wanted him bad. I think he's a guy that his intelligence, I like the way he can cover sideline to sideline. I like his tackling. He's a sure tackler. I like that he was the leader of the best defense in the country last year. And I really wanted Nakobe Dean in Washington. And then to see him go to Philly, it's just, I don't know, disappointing. Really disappointing. So let's move on. I've waxed enough about how bad Washington did. And let's talk about Dallas. I really didn't like their draft. I didn't think they had any sort of plan going into this. It feels like they were feeling out the draft board and then kind of just drafting guys that they thought they needed. Hey, Stove. What's up, buddy?
How's it going, sir?
Good to see you, man.
You as well.
I'm just talking losers here. We'll get back to your winners, too. I'll give you a chance to talk about them.
You're good. But, yeah, big losers right there.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yep. I'm glad
I don't understand the Tyler Smith pick either. He's a guy that he's a second, maybe even a third day pick, and he goes in the first round. Everyone's joking about the UT Chattanooga pick with the Pats, but this is a guy that I watched at Tulsa in a couple of games. He's stiff as a board, and dudes in the MAC were just roughing him up, or Conference USA. Sorry, they were roughing him up. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts as the Cowboys fan. I bitched about Washington for a while. What are your thoughts on the draft for the Cowboys?
Absolutely shitty. We talked about it the day of the draft and probably beforehand, that the Cowboys needed to get back their run game. Okay. And they needed some offensive line help. Okay. Back to 2018, 2019, even 2017, when they had, 1,000, 1,500 yard rushers. And you had Lindenberg, I believe, from Purdue. Was it Purdue or Iowa? I can't. Iowa, that's right.
He was still on the board. I thought for sure they would try to
that would have been
Travis Frederick after their retirement. That would have been a big pick for them.
That would have been the most logical sense to me. And yeah, Justin, you said it. I mean, he draws a lot of penalties. As
you know why guys draw lots of penalties? Because they're not in position. They're stiff, right? He doesn't move well, and you're reaching, you're grabbing, trying to make up for the fact that you got bad feet and bad technique.
Yeah, and so you draft a guy who had I think 16 total penalties for the year and 12 of them being holding penalties. And you are an offensive line that was one of the most penalized teams in the NFL last year. So a lot of this just does not make sense. You had a perfect opportunity to draft Lindenberg there as a center to start the rebirth, the regrow, rebuild of that offensive line. And, you totally failed on that pick, and you let him go. Literally the next pick, Baltimore picked him up.
Yeah.
So
we're talking Cowboys failures here, Aaron. I already bitched about Washington. Now we're bitching about Dallas. So what about the Jags, right? You look at them as losers here. Having the first overall pick, that's not a result you would expect. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I agree in many ways that I don't think Jacksonville had a good draft. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on why you lump them here as losers.
So, leading up to the draft, a couple weeks before the draft started, everyone was thinking Aiden Hutchinson. Okay. Then all of a sudden you get Trayvon Walker, who kind of, leapfrogs everyone. I think he was kind of a late first round or, late top 10, maybe.
Early on, he had like a 20s grade. Like he was going to go in the 20s late in the first round. And then he started shooting up the board. And then suddenly everyone's like, oh yeah, Trent Baalke's going to draft him first.
Yeah. And so he got all this recognition and became the clear favorite at number 1. And I think it had a lot to do with potential upside here, with Aiden. I think he will be a good NFL player. I don't think he'll be a great NFL player. I think they see a lot more potential in Trayvon here. And so that's why he went number 1 to Jacksonville. But if you look at what Jacksonville needed, they needed offensive protection for your running back, ETN, who's coming off he didn't play a snap in the NFL season. He coming off knee surgery. You drafted a quarterback number 1 as the number 1 overall pick the prior draft. So you need to protect that overall draft pick. And they went defensive heavy. They went linebackers, edge rushers. Like they didn't need those guys. And so it was just baffling to me to see why they went that route when clearly you need offensive production and offensive help.
Yeah, for sure. I was confused by they just kept drafting defense and drafting. And I think they mixed in like an interior offensive lineman, but they also didn't get a lot of skill position guys that I thought that they would go after too. So I'm with you. I think the focus of what they were doing is really what kind of puts them down in the pecking order for me in terms of teams that lost the draft. So
yeah.
All right, let's talk your winners here. I waxed on about the Eagles. I waxed on about the Lions. What did you like about the Jets and the Ravens? They got the best grades from Mel Kiper, so somebody agrees with you.
And, they got some offensive help. They got some defensive help too. And the Jets, obviously I think they had 2 top 10 picks. But really what I like, and obviously the Jets were, I think one of everyone's favorites as far as a draft or as far as a draft winner. What I'm really interested to see is how Baltimore utilizes their tight end pick here. And we talked about this on the Blitz before. Lamar Jackson, he's had a couple down years, and it's because they got away from their 2 tight end system. And so it'll be interesting to see if Harbaugh goes back to that, and if they do, see what kind of offensive production Lamar has. Hopefully, going back into that 2 tight end system.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know we got into the ins and outs of kind of Lamar's a great when he's throwing the ball over the middle, when he's able to stay in the middle of the field, that's when he has his most success. So far in his career, that's where he's had the most success. He doesn't thrive on the outside like a lot of the bigger playmaking quarterbacks do. But for them to get back to, it looks like they're going to try to get back to a 2 tight end set, or at least feature the tight end more. I think that, they probably recognize that that's something that they need to do. They traded away Hollywood Brown. It doesn't look like they're going to be focused too heavily on outside wide receivers. They're talking about bringing Jarvis Landry in. Where does Jarvis Landry thrive? He thrives in the slot, middle of the field. He's a guy that he moves the chains for you. Reliable guy across the middle. So I think that's a good point, right? Not only did the Ravens, in my opinion, do well filling holes and getting some of the better playmakers at some positions, I think they also put Lamar Jackson into a position where he can be successful as well.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So let's move on and let's talk about somebody we thought went way too early, right? So let's start with you. I mentioned earlier that we would talk about Derek Stingley when I was talking about Sauce Gardner going to the Jets. What are your thoughts on Stingley going 3 to the Texans?
I think this is an absolutely one of the most stupidest picks of the first round to go with the Dallas Cowboys pick. He had a good season 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And that was obviously that was the national championship year with Burrow and all those guys. He hasn't done shit since.
Yeah.
So I am baffled by this pick. You and I commented when that pick was made. It was mind blowing, and we're like, "Is O'Brien back there? Like, is here for him?" There are so many other better corners and safeties in the draft that they could have gone with. I mean, Hamilton dropped down, from Notre Dame. It just baffling. I mean, this pick, along with the Cowboys pick, for me was just like, what are we doing? Like, did you do your research? Like, the dude had one good year and has had 2 bad years at a prominent SEC school playing against pretty damn good competition in the SEC.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean,
I think that's a good word for it, right? Baffling. I think that's the perfect word for it, because the talk all leading up to the draft was that Stingley was a mid-teens, maybe even in the 20s guy. And everybody was talking about how far he had fallen from the 2019 season that he had, right? Didn't play in 2020 because of COVID. He opted out. And then 2021, he got nicked up a little bit with injuries, but he didn't look good when he was on the field, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I think I misspoke. I don't think he opted out of COVID, but I think everybody's giving him a pass because of COVID. Everybody keeps bringing that up. You're still playing football, man.
You're still playing football. Yeah, exactly.
You're not the only person that was afflicted by COVID, right? Like there were things that went on, I'm sure, but you're not the only one. And other teams, other players, they overcame. So
yeah, and Justin's right. Like exactly, you had they picked what, 3rd? Yeah, exactly. I mean, look what the Lions traded up to get the number 12 pick. Look what they gave up for that. So at a number 3 pick, absolutely. Like, if you didn't know, like where you want to go, like if at that point though, you should know where you want to go. And this pick, I think, came pretty quickly too.
Like they were convinced.
So they were convinced. So they must see something. But yeah, Justin's absolutely right here. Like, if they could have traded back for more picks in the draft, and I think could have done a lot better as far as draft wise.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, let's talk about Drake London for a minute. Okay. I don't understand how this guy even ended up in the conversation with the top receivers in this draft. I get he's big, and I get that he's got a decent vertical, but one, he was not very productive at USC, a premier university for wide receivers, in a conference that has 1, maybe 2 good defenses in it. You should be thriving in that conference with me at quarterback. If you're number 6 overall wide receiver going number 6 in the draft, you should be 12 to 1,300 yards a season and 10 tutties in that fucking conference. It's a joke of a conference, especially defensively. I don't even call it a Power 5 conference anymore. I'm as disrespectful as I possibly can be to the Pac-12 because it's not good football. They've got one, maybe Utah is like the only good defense in that fucking conference. So for Drake London, he's a plotting guy, runs real fucking heavy feet, doesn't get separation, doesn't use his body to get separation. As a big guy, I look at it like what Keyshawn Johnson used to be. He was a 4.5 40 guy, but he would beat the fuck out of you at the line of scrimmage to get separation. You were not going to put your hands on him and slow him down. I watched Drake London, and he gets fucking beat up by tiny guys. He got beat up by those cornerbacks, McDuffie and the other guy from Washington that went in the fucking 3rd and 4th round. Like, those guys are beating you up, and you're the number 6 pick? Mm-hmm. I don't know what Atlanta was doing. They must really like him. I thought he went too early. I just don't get that pick. It's just, oh, man. Yeah, right, Justin. It's seriously, like, Pac-12 is just, it's not a good conference right now.
Especially Arizona.
Arizona is struggling, man. They are struggling. They are struggling. But I just didn't understand all of this hype around Drake London. Like, I hated John Dotson, but if Washington had picked Drake London, I probably would have, like, given up completely because I just don't see it. He reminds me of, you remember Mike Williams that Detroit picked out of USC?
Yeah.
It reminds me of him. A plotting guy, big body, didn't really get a lot of separation. We saw Mike Williams make some plays going up over guys because he's tall. Same thing with Drake London. We see some highlights for him going up over guys when the quarterback throws a jump ball. That shit ain't going to happen in the NFL. There's too many good athletes, too many good defenders. You're not going to be able to just jump over guys. And it was so far and few between. He put up no numbers. Wasn't impressive at USC.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
All right, let's talk about some under the radar guys. Stove, man, we talked about Malik Willis a lot leading up to the draft. And
that we did.
As the picks kept coming in and as the rounds kept going by, I kept thinking, like, we're going to get a report that, like, Malik Willis had his leg chopped off. Because that's the only thing that makes sense to me that he made it to the 4th round. A guy that is that elite of an athlete that throws the ball 60, 65 yards with almost no effort. I don't get it how he slips to the 4th round. So what are your thoughts on this?
Man, we thought there would be 2 quarterbacks go in the 1st round. Kenny Pickett, and then, Malik Willis. And I was very high on Malik Willis. I really thought that when the Lions traded up to number 12, I was really hoping that that's where they were going to go.
Yeah.
It obviously didn't work out that way. We knew Pickett, once Pittsburgh got on the board, it was kind of a no-brainer for him to go with Pickett. But for Malik Willis, after all the hype that he was getting after his pro day, after the combine, everyone was talking him up, and just what a great individual he was. High character, lots of potential with him. And so I don't know if the fact that he played at Liberty had anything to do with how low he went. But if you look at, some of these quarterbacks, some of them come from, some lower end schools, so to speak, some of your not Power 5 conferences. I think Malik Willis is going to be starting by the 4th game this year. I really do. I really like his upside in this. I think he's more of a talented quarterback, dual threat quarterback, can run in the pocket too, can, spread that defense out. And so it's definitely going to be interesting to see, how everything transpires in training camp and preseason games for him. But man, to fall to the fourth round, and you had Matt Corral went before him, and one other who was the other quarterback that went before him? Because he was the fourth quarterback, or was he the fifth quarterback? I can't remember now. We were talking about it, but
we were talking about it, but
I can't remember. But yeah, for him to fall,
Ritter went to the Falcons before him.
Yeah,
that's right.
Man, I mean,
crazy.
I hope there's been some great quarterbacks that have gone in the later rounds, and I hope he's one of them.
Yeah, for sure. I was a little perplexed by the Ritter pick with the Falcons too. I thought they would take a guy like, Malik Willis here. That I thought they were gonna take a chance on him. So, yeah, I think Tennessee wins here. Honestly, kind of sneaky pick here because I think they've had about enough of the Tannehill experiment there in Tennessee, and I think they're ready to move on. And I think maybe not by the fourth game. I don't know that I would.
Sure.
I don't know that I'm that bullish. I like that you are that bullish. I do think he's going to see the field this year, though.
Absolutely. And
Tannehill's going to have a short leash as well because I think Tennessee sees the opportunity is there. The window is open, and that window doesn't stay open for very long.
Exactly. And, when they signed Tannehill, the quarterback market at the time was not very good.
Right.
So I think, they had to sign him just because that was their best option at the time.
And then he had a first couple of years that were good. He got a bit of an extension. His cap, he's got the highest cap number of quarterbacks this year. It's fucking weird. Ryan fucking Tannehill. The highest cap hit.
Not Matt Ryan anymore?
No, not Matt Ryan anymore. It's Ryan fucking Tannehill. Something about that Ryan name. Yeah, very, very strange. I was really surprised to see Malik Willis drop that far. So
yeah.
My under the radar pick here though, James Cook, to Buffalo, and this is a lot more about fit than it is about the player for me.
You're pumped for this one. You're pumped for this.
I am, man.
Dad probably is.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I told my dad I thought it was a really great pick. He's a Bills fan. I've got a real soft spot for Buffalo Bills. Obviously, I'm from the Buffalo area originally, but my dad's a Bills fan. I've got friends that are. I just really like this fit because Buffalo has been dying for some dynamism out of the backfield. And that's what James Cook brings. He's not a guy that's going to go between the tackles and beat you head on, beat your linebackers head on, but he's a guy that you're going to be able to hand the ball off in the shotgun, let Josh Allen see the defense, hand the ball off in the shotgun, let him get off tackle, throw the ball to him out of the backfield. Ran a really good 40, almost beat his brother in the 40. And we know what Delvin Cook can do with that speed when he gets out on the edge and he can disappear on folks. I really like this pick because they're not going to ask him to be a 3-down, carry the ball 25 times and catch 10 balls out of the backfield guy. They're going to ask him to be a guy that they can put in on first and second down and be a combo back because they throw the ball a lot in Buffalo because they've got a dude under center. They're going to ask James Cook to do what I think they thought Devin Singletary could do a little more of, and that's be able to get on the perimeter, be able to beat guys off the edge, spread the defense out a bit, and take some of that pressure off of Josh Allen, be a safety valve, right? And that is really, I think that's what James Cook needed in terms of a landing place, was somewhere that was going to not ask him to do more than he does. And he was really good at Georgia in that role where they could just get him on the edge and let him be an athlete out there, throwing the ball out of the backfield, hand the ball off tackle, and let him do some work. So I think Buffalo is going to do some similar things with him. Love the fit. I think he's going to thrive there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good pick by them.
Yeah, for sure. That was a sneaky good pick. All right, so let's finish up here we've talked a lot about NIL, right? And
That we have.
we've talked about the good, we've talked about the bad. We had Oppendorf on, the president of Oppendorf on. I forget his name. He's your buddy,
Derek Peterson.
Derek Peterson.
Derek Peterson.
And vice president. Sorry,
Vice president.
He was on, talked a lot about kind of how the NIL thing works, the ins and outs, how they get athletes linked up with companies and vice versa, how they work with schools, those sorts of things. So now the NCAA is starting a task force, and it's a couple of the big names. I shouldn't say the NCAA is. A couple of conference schmucks are taking it upon themselves to say we need to do this, and now they're looking into it, putting this task force together, right? This all started with conference commissioners thinking that they weren't in enough control, right? So what are your thoughts on this task force? Is this a good thing, bad thing? I think we could probably see a little bit of both, maybe good and bad. What are your thoughts?
So you mentioned that they just made up the task force. So I was under the impression of that as well. From what I have heard and from what I have read, this task force was actually started, I think maybe back in August, September, for them to look at things. It just so happens to come out, which, no one knew about this task force until a week ago.
Quiet.
Okay, no one knew about this task force until a week ago, and I think you are hearing about it now because of, like you said, a couple, big name commissioners of some Power 5 conferences, and the whole. I've been hearing his name. I cannot remember it right now. The wide receiver for Pitt, who was allegedly talked to by Lincoln Riley and USC about coming out there and playing football for them, and he wasn't even in the portal.
Jordan Addison,
thank you.
Yeah.
Now he's in the portal, but he's not ruling out a comeback to Pitt yet. Okay. So, and then the rulings that they came out with yesterday, I believe, was that, donors have no say, like donors cannot talk to the prospects, the players, anything like that. How in the fuck are you going to regulate this? I love listening to the McAfee show, and they were talking about it today, and they brought up a good point. Like, what is a number that's too much, that's going to throw red flags? Is it this guy that, gets a $50,000, signing bonus to play with them? Is it a guy that makes a $500,000 or a guy that makes $1 million? You have those guys. Each player is different. Each player is getting a different opportunity than the other. Not all of them are the same opportunities and the same dollar amount. So how are you going to regulate this? What are the red flags going to be to where, this guy, he was leaning heavily towards Texas, but now all of a sudden he went to Georgia?
Yeah.
Whoa, let's look at his bank account.
Is it an NIL deal with Lamborghini? That's too much.
Yeah, totally. Just, perfect
crazy,
example. Yeah. But it's like, those are, and leading up to the ruling late Monday, early Tuesday, whenever they came out with this on, with the whole donors and everything, the lawyers and attorneys for the NCAA players were like basically just throwing it back in the NCAA's face here, and we like, go ahead and try this. Like, we are ready. Like, there will be an antitrust lawsuit coming at you within 48 hours. And do I agree with the task force? Yes. Do I agree how it has come about? I don't know. But you know who I blame here? And we talked about it, I think, either the last time or two times, ago. And that's the NCAA in general and Mark Emmert in letting it get to this point to where they took you to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court ruled in the player's favor. So you had all this time to figure something out for NIL deals and, restrictions and guidelines and everything else. But you didn't do any of that. You thought this would just pass. And then the Supreme Court ruled in the player's favor. And then it was like, oh shit, what are we going to fucking do? And now it's, I use this term loosely, the wild, wild west out there. Okay. So I do agree that there does need to be some guidelines, like the Jordan Addison deal. If he is not in the transfer portal, you can't talk to him. You can't offer him money to come play at USC or wherever. If he's in the transfer portal, okay, then great. Then it's, do whatever, or to an extent. But it's almost if you remember the movie Blue Chips,
yeah. Like absolutely. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with you, right? I think that this whole fucking secrecy thing, right? And I don't actually believe either that this task force has been in existence for as long as it has. Yeah. I believe that they had a collective of minds that were talking about NIL and the implications and the impacts to the NCAA, and probably mostly focused on the impacts to the NCAA's bottom dollar. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that the task force was formed until we started to see some of this stuff in the offseason, right? Transfer portal stuff, the big deals that we're seeing, and all this reporting that comes around it. And suddenly the NCAA starts thinking, are we losing money? Are we creating a situation where no, yeah, absolutely. They're not losing money.
Can I interrupt you just real quick? Okay. You talk about losing money here. Okay. Let me just throw this out there. Okay. You are not losing money. And I'll tell you why. Okay. If you've been following college football at all for the past 2-3 weeks, what is one major conference that is about ready to embark on a huge TV deal? Big Ten.
Yep.
What is that number? Over $1 billion TV deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Over $1 billion. Now, with that, at the time, reports were coming out saying that every school in the Big Ten was going to get roughly 70 some million. I think it was mid 70s. Now, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Fox, these school, ESPN, they're almost in a bidding war here. So now there's reports of that number even going upwards into the 100 millions per school in the Big Ten. And so are we losing money?
No.
Fuck no, you're not. So why does the conference get to make over $1 billion? Each school gets to make over, roughly anywhere from 75 to 100 million. But you're going to put restrictions on how much a player gets from a donor to go to their school.
Yeah, and what we're going to see though is that the donors are just they're going to go buy a local business.
Absolutely.
They're going to say, you can continue to run the business. I just need to be able to sponsor so-and-so or endorse so-and-so with this business. Right.
Yeah,
so
I think
we're going to see workarounds.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the booster from Miami down there who's brought the Cavender twins.
Who's fucking Miami?
Yeah. Right. The Cavender twins in basketball from San Diego State, and brought over a few other people. And the Miami basketball player
who was demanding more money.
demanding more money. Otherwise, he's going to enter the transfer portal. And he flat out came out and said his deal was pretty damn lucrative.
Yeah,
You know?
he did.
So, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good, man. That's good info. And that's right? The TV money is just getting silly. Look, I mean, Fox just paid Tom Brady fucking $375 million whenever he decides to retire.
And
They've
he's
got
making,
money to give.
Yeah. And he's making more money doing that than he has
ever had in his career.
Stupid.
23 years in the NFL, he's going to make more money in 10 years working about 21 days a year.
Exactly.
I got to get on that fucking program somehow.
Nope.
I just got to go win 7 Super Bowls, I guess.
Right.
No big deal.
No big deal.
But I'm with you, right? This task force is goofy. I think it's about control, and I think it's about the NCAA feeling like we've lost control with this offseason. And that's why I say I don't believe this task force in its current structure was in existence. I believe they had a group of minds that were together talking about what are the expected impacts, what can we see, what do we expect, what are we potentially getting ourselves into? Because as you put it, they dragged their feet for so long trying to keep their thumb on the student athlete. And we know goddamn well none of these fucking most of these fucking football players are athlete students. They're not fucking student athletes, right? Yeah. And that doesn't just go for football, basketball, and other sports. A lot of them are athlete first, student second. But the NCAA wanted to keep their thumb on them, and they felt it slipping away. So they go and they formalize this task force, and that's why we're seeing it. I think there's opportunities for good to come out of it. I think if we're going to put things in the clearinghouse and whatnot that are going to help athletes understand the impacts and the potential tax implications and things outside of college eligibility, I'm fine with that. But the bad side of this for me is that the student athlete's going to fucking suffer again. Yeah. Right. And that's the issue that I don't like. But I do think in the end, the NCAA is probably going to lose this control eventually. Yeah. They'll put something in place that says restriction, and then donors are going to, like I said, they're going to find ways, shell companies to fucking sponsor these student athletes. So they're going to find ways around it. The NCAA they're just grasping at straws, trying to maintain control because that's who the fuck they are.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. We've got about 2 minutes to our next show, so let's wrap it up here. You have any closing thoughts here, bud?
Man, it's good to talk football again, college football. Mm-hmm. And as always, the NIL is always going to be playing a big factor in the NFL, the college football realm right now, as, that's the big talking point until we start opening up, fall camps and everything else that. So yeah, it's good to talk college football again.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's good to be back in the saddle. Thanks for joining. I know you're a busy man this time of year. Appreciate you getting out here. Good to talk to you. See you in a couple minutes here on Rosenbaggers.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron, for joining again. Justin, new viewer, I believe. So, Justin, appreciate you hopping on. We're doing every 2 weeks in the off season right now. So catch us in a couple weeks. So appreciate you joining.
All right. For the Big Stove, I am Gary. This has been Tailgate Trash Talk. We are out.